Today I'm going to be talking about over-responsibility and how to take responsibility for things when historically you have felt responsible for absolutely everything. Stay tuned because at the end of this video I'm going to be doing a big clearing on this complex, the over-responsibility complex, which is very common for empaths. But first I want to dive into the mechanics of where over-responsibility comes from so we can stop feeling responsible throughout the day in our lives for everyone else's stuff. My name is Adam. I'm a spiritual and human transformation coach. Now, as a child, I was highly sensitive, and my mother was very sensitive as well. My mother has an over-responsibility complex, so it's natural that I kind of got that because we tend to pick up our patterns from our parents, especially the mother. She grew up in a house where there was a lot of trauma. She loved her father and she liked her mother, but she had a very contentious relationship with her mother. My grandma was bipolar back in the days where they didn't know what to do, electroshock therapy, in and out of psych wards. She used to hit my mother. She'd tell her things like, I want to bang your head into a wall or beat you to a pulp. So my mother grew up walking on eggshells all the time and was in trouble a lot for things that she didn't do. And this is very common for people with trauma, and especially people who are empathic too, and they kind of go together, and I'm going to explain that some more. So I got this, and I got yelled at a lot. I just did. It's okay. But what happened with me was the same thing that happened with her. I never knew what I did because I really didn't do anything. And I developed this pattern of being hypervigilant, which is common in trauma, where you're walking on eggshells all the time because your environment's unstable and nothing really makes any sense. So I was always getting yelled at and always waiting and monitoring my environment for when something was just slightly off and the other shoe was going to drop. But as kids, we tend to internalize everything. We don't know that we didn't do anything. We just assume it is our fault. And what happened with this was, eventually, for lots of reasons, I ended up being a drug addict for many years. And I had been a very honest kid, but as a drug addict, I developed a really bad habit of lying, and I went into rehab. And in the rehab, it was all about taking responsibility for your part in situations. And I had a very hard time with this because, one, I had so much damage from the drugs, I didn't really know what was going on. And two, I had spent so many years dissociating from being in trouble as a kid for things I didn't do, that anytime someone would point something out to me, I would immediately get extremely defensive. Because I wasn't just responding in the moment, I was responding to my past. And when you're always responsible for things that aren't yours, you don't know when you actually did do something, and you can't really own it because to you owning it is owning all of it. And the trauma response gets activated, and then I would get very defensive because I was responding to being yelled at as a child, going like, no, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. That's all I could think of and feel. Even though in rehab, after being a drug addict for a long time, there were a lot of things that I did do. Does this make sense? Like, can you relate to the confusion that comes when you don't know where something ends and where it begins? One of the things that also happens with trauma as children, especially when you're very sensitive, is we don't learn the law of cause and effect. Nothing makes sense, right? Like, there's not an equal and opposite reaction for every action. That's how, reality is supposed to function, but it really doesn't. Like, for example, my dad would yell sometimes, but it never really traumatized me. Because my dad would only yell after something like this. He would tell us not to jump on the couch. And then he'd tell us 3 more times not to jump on the couch. And then the fourth time, my sister and I would jump on the couch. He'd come in and he'd yell really loud, like, I told you not to jump on the couch. And it would kind of scare me. Two things happened. One, it was like, I was like, oh yeah. I mean, I get why he yelled. He told me 4 times not to do this, and I did it. Then he yelled, and then after he yelled, he didn't yell anymore. It was done. So I didn't get so traumatized because I wasn't so confused and then therefore defensive, because I could see my part. The reaction, even though I didn't like it and it was scary, made sense, and then it was done. But a lot of times with my mom, it's like I would be lectured for hours and hours and hours and hours for something I didn't do, and then the next day, and then the next day, and then 3 months later she'd bring it up again, and I kind of blew a fuse in my head. And it's very important to note that my mom was just acting out her pattern that she got from my grandma, because my mother never was able to spend time figuring out her reactions and her emotions, because as a child she was always in trouble, and then actually had to take care of my grandma and her father, so she was responsible for way more things than a kid really ever should have been. And it's really important to understand this, because when we see where our parents and our grandparents came from, it's much easier to have compassion for what they where they were, because no one really had time until just recently, some of us, to really go through all their stuff and work it out. They were just thrown into adulthood. Here's the other thing that happens when we become adults and have an over-responsibility complex, and one of the reasons it becomes difficult to take responsibility for things, because again, as children, there was the trauma, and there was also lots of shame, blame, and guilt. If anytime you did anything as a kid, whether you saw your part or not, if there was a lot of punishment and a lot of blame or shaming, or you were made to feel really guilty, when you go to own your part, or you're confronted with a situation where someone points something out to you as an adult, it's almost impossible, if you don't work through this, to just in a neutral fashion look at what they're saying and be like yes or no, because you respond to the past of all of the guilt, all of the blame, and all of the shaming, and then you react to that. You're like, well, fuck you, I didn't leave the door open, you motherfucker. They may be shaming you, but they may also just be being like, hey, you left the door open, and you flip out on them because you're reacting and defending against the shame, blame, and guilt, because some part of you knows that you don't really deserve to feel that way, certainly not chronically. But that also gets in the way of looking reasonably at whether you left the door open or not, because when you understand that it's not about beating yourself up, it's just simply about learning from a situation, correcting it, and doing it different next time, that we're all imperfect. We all make mistakes, and the only point of looking at the mistake is to see what you did to do it different next time, so you can improve, instead of fuck you, punishment, you piece of shit, where a lot of the correction in our world and our childhoods came from, right? Then it's much easier to look. So the key point here is really beginning to monitor our reactions, because essentially that's what we're responsible for. I was always told I was responsible for everyone else's feelings, which I'm not. Nobody's responsible for anybody else's feelings. We are responsible for our own actions, our responses, and our reactions. And how that would play out with someone is by not being responsible for someone else's feelings, I don't mean that just gives you carte blanche to do whatever you want. But if you're treating yourself with self-love and taking responsibility for your part, you're going to become generally a really decent or good person, and you're not going to want to hurt someone else. So you're going to be responsible for your side of that by being aware of your actions. But people also respond very improportionately, especially nowadays. And that's not your problem, that's theirs. You can't fix them. You can only change you. And that's where we kind of get clarity on responsibility. Even like when things happened as children that were very traumatic and awful. It's not really that it was your fault, it wasn't, but it is now our responsibility to monitor these reactions and shift them because we can. And if we don't believe we can, then we just keep giving our power away to something else and we never let go of it, which is what forgiveness is. It's just letting go of our reactions. So now I want to do a clearing on the over-responsibility complex. It's going to be a bit of an energy clearing. So I just want you to take a minute and just kind of question. You can close your eyes and meditate a little. Just kind of notice your feet, your hands, your body a little bit, and just kind of question your intuition, your higher self. Like, where do you have difficulty knowing what you are responsible for and what you're not? Where do you have an over responsibility complex? And a lot of us do. And I can't go like deep into like childhood trauma on a YouTube video, but we're just going to do a general clearing and just give permission for any parts of you that constantly feel responsible for everything and everyone else to come to the surface. And this is the thing with empaths too. Like when we have trauma as kids and we don't know what's ours and what isn't, then we start taking other people's energy. Because it's like, oh, that person's in a bad mood. It must be my fault. Here, I'll take it. And just notice where in your body you're holding other people's stuff and you're holding beliefs that it's your fault. And we're just going to ask, bring in your higher self, your spirit guides, and clear and remove any and all over-responsibility complexes, responses, and patterns from their root with everything they've created and co-created. All planes, all dimensions, past, present, and future. We're going to ask all of this to just be taken and neutralized and just give permission. Also give permission for any stuff that you're carrying from anybody else that you took on as a result of this over-responsibility complex. Just send it to its proper place in the universe and let it go. And just take a minute and breathe. Notice what you feel in your body. If there's any tightness, any stiffness, we're going to ask to have any shame, blame, and guilt patterns and emotions and any contracts with shame, blame, and guilt on all levels be brought up and cleared. Any almost like templates where you're learning through shame, blame, and guilt. They are no longer necessary. And just give your higher self permission to completely neutralize the shame, blame, and guilt classroom. You can take responsibility without feeling chronically awful. Just give permission for that to come up and to move out and to release with everything it's created, co-created, past, present, and future. Send it to its proper place in the universe. Good, just notice you're breathing a little bit. Notice if there's any tightness or stiffness or frustration or any emotions that come up. Anger, sadness, fear, guilt and shame, obviously. And just give permission for those to release. And then we're going to ask for a new template to be downloaded. And just give it permission and just know that it happens. It's like consciously you're just going to absorb the information cosmically from your higher self. How to take responsibility without self-punishment, shame, blame, and guilt. And how to have discernment as far as what is yours and what is not. And we're just going to give your higher self permission to kind of bring this in the best way for you and for the highest good of all. And this kind of takes a little bit of time to integrate. And just kind of notice what happens if you feel any different. And just kind of pay attention to any realizations you have over the next few days. And you might have some emotions that come up, some frustration, and just give them space. You might have some memories from your past. Good. Okay, that's going to take a little more time, but thank you so much for watching. For anyone who's interested, I am doing breakthrough calls. So if you want some, guidance on, where your life is, if you want some guidance on some of your blocks and what you can do to release them and shift them and transform in new ways, there's a Calendly link below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I very much appreciate it. And thank you so much. Until next time.